to pause. Right, so it looks like we are live, folks. So bear with me here. So yeah, we're in a live Q&A with Nasty. I'm sure everyone knows about Nasty already, but he flew the F-14A and D, and then went on to fly the F-18 Super Hornet. And yeah, this is going to be a great Q&A. But yeah, Nasty, what's been happening since the last time we chatted?
Yeah, so it's great to be back with you again, Mike. Just doing lots of stuff with my pursuits in business, and then also various podcasts. I've had a lot of fun. Many of your listeners and viewers are also connected in the DCS world, and I've
Yes.
had a lot of fun with Ward Carroll actually going back into my past and flying the DCS, and how hard that is, by the way. And so for those of you out there that are, first of all, really good at the DCS, good job. For those of you that are still struggling with it, I will tell you that I can't even fly that simulator very well, even after 3,000 hours in Tomcats. But it's really cool to be back in the cockpit again, even in the simulation.
Yeah, I can imagine. And while your questions are coming in, yeah, where can we find your book online in case anyone's not heard of it yet, Nasty?
So the book is available on Amazon. So it's in the right hand corner there. Learn how to lead to win. Aircraft carrier on the front. We've got all of the formats, including audio. I narrate my own audio book. But more importantly, not only the book, but a lot of leadership content and a lot of my newsletters and things like that can be found on our website, www.mikemanazir.com. And I dive into a lot of the leadership stuff that's on, underpin my flying, that underpin my leading, that underpin my naval service on that website. So there's a lot of content on there, and there's also buttons how to buy a book, how to buy a signed book, and then you get a lot of the stuff that kind of was the raw material to be able to write those stories.
Brilliant stuff. And all them links in the description below. But as you can see on the right there, Nasty, there's some questions coming in. So guys, get your questions coming in for Nasty, and yeah, enjoy.
Well, thanks, and please bear with me, you guys, as I look at the screen here. For those of you who know Tomcat A's, F-14 A's, a lot of steam gauges, and not a lot of digital. So I'm looking at a large screen here. So my first question from Benjamin Perez. Thanks, Benjamin. Hello, sir, to you. What's the future of naval aviation look like to you? One human pilot launched with drone wingman, UAVs piloted from a ready room full of sim pits, autonomous UAVs. And thank you too for asking the question. So what I used to talk about in my last tour in the Navy was I envisioned a single seat fighter going off the front of the carrier, and shortly behind that single seat fighter, 3 unmanned wingmen took off behind it. And they're not remotely piloted. They are computer driven, so mouse driven. And so the initial launches from the carrier are controlled down in a room that is kind of like sim pits, because they're giving the pilots or the operators of the unmanned systems a way to communicate with the vehicle. So there'll be a screen with the vehicle, the way what it's looking at, all those kind of things. So once it launched, then they would say, hey, join with Nasty. And the robot would know where to go based on the IP address of the manned airplane. So those 3 airplanes take off, they form up on me, and now I'm flying out there. And let's say that I go out and I'm on an offensive mission, and I push those, and now I have control in the cockpit, and literally like just another sensor on the airplane. The human vehicle interface is such that I can press a button, and I tell all those robots to take 25-mile combat spread away from me and each other. And now you got every 25 miles, there's a manned airplane in the middle, and the 3 other ones are stretched out. You got 100 miles of battlefront, 1 human. And so now you're taking in the information from each one of those robots, and you're deciding what to do. Maybe robot number 4, way out there to the right-hand side is getting low on gas, and you send him to the tanker with 1 mouse click, refuel, click, and now it goes and finds the tanker back behind you somewhere. Maybe the one next to your left says, I have a threat emitter, on my nose for 75 miles. What do I do with that? And you click on monitor, or even more than that, human in the loop, rules of engagement, threats coming in, and here comes the threat, and robot number 3 says, got a threat, it meets the rules of engagement, and you hit the button, kill the threat. Missile launches off the robot and goes in there. That's how I see this. We do have some autonomous UAVs that can just be programmed to go out and like monitor. There will always be a human in the loop. We are really, really far away, probably 50 years away from robots doing their own thing. Even though all this stuff on AI on TV, the technology is going there, but we'll have a human either in the loop or on the loop as we go forward. So great question. Shabi, thanks for the call. I would like to know F-18 versus F-14 Tomcat aerodynamics compression from the pilot. I think you mean aerodynamics impression. So people ask me this all the time. What's your favorite airplane, Tomcat or Super Hornet? I said, well, kind of like to have both. It's kind of like having a mid-year, like a 1967 Chevy Corvette. That's the Tomcat. Goes fast, loud, goes fast straight, doesn't turn real well, kind of, manual controls, you're shifting, very sexy. Fun to fly, fun to drive. Super Hornet, like a 2023 911 Porsche. Digital flight controls, you do things with that airplane because the computers let you. There's 3 computers in a Super Hornet and there's 1 pilot. So you're only 25% of the voting membership of that airplane. So our newest airplanes are being, really digital. They're flying computers. So Tomcat, you really had to be careful with applying the controls because it's a pure hydraulic airplane. And so if I cross control the Tomcat, it's gonna spin. In a Super Hornet, if I cross control a Super Hornet, depending on how much control I put in, it goes, oh, I know what you want to do. You want to go like to the right. So I'll give you a specific, for instance. When you are maneuvering at slow flight in any airplane, as you start to get to very extreme angles of attack and you're in the stall mode, you must move the rudders to move the airplane. If you move the stick, you get what's called adverse yaw and then proverse roll, where the airplane will roll off. And we demonstrate that all the time in fighters, in Cessna 152s, in any airplane. When you get up to that stall point, you move the stick to the left, airplane's going to roll off to the right. Super Hornet, you get up to that stall point and you're fighting the airplane slow and you move the stick to the left, it goes, oh, you really want to use rudders. So we'll go ahead and put rudders in with the stick movement. And the software will actually move the rudders even though you haven't touched the rudder pedals. Now, rudder pedals still work the same in the Super Hornet. You can push on the rudders when you think about it. And as a Tomcat guy, I would always push on the rudders and keep the stick neutralized. But actually, the Super Hornet flies like that. So it's the benefit of the digital stuff. And then as you guys all know, Tomcat G limit, in fact, there's another question down here, 6.5 Gs positive, minus 2.4 negative. Super Hornet, 7.5 Gs negative, or positive, negative. 7.5 Gs positive and a 2.5 Gs negative. And so they have G limit capabilities. 2ZZGE100. That's a great handle. Thanks for coming in. While the NATOPS limited Tomcat pilots to 6.5 Gs, pilots like Snort, that's Snort Snodgrass, are on record saying they used to pull 9 and 9.5 G regularly. What was yours? Also, did having a 6.5 G limit a huge disadvantage versus others? Generally, yes. Having a lower G limit means that you don't have as much aerodynamic capability as, say, like an F-16 that actually has a 9G limit. Because when the airplane has the propulsion capability to turn through 9G, so all the way through 9Gs and full afterburner in F-16, it keeps the turn coming. If you have a 9G airplane and you don't have the thrust, or let's say you're at less thrust, maybe you're mid-throttle, and you yank 9Gs, the airplane's going to stall. It's just going to stall out. So if you can push the airplane through that G limit, then you're all the way to that G limit. You're going to be in a better place. I have fought F-16s, and I gunned an F-16 one time because he pulled his F-16 onto what's called the AOA limiter. He had too much AOA on the airplane, and he pulled and the airplane stopped, and it limited his angle of attack, not his G. So Gs are only one factor of it. If you pull more than 6.5 Gs in a Tomcat, you're overstressing the airplane. That downs the airplane and causes an inspection. You're not supposed to run around overstressing airplanes. Now, Snort did things with a Tomcat, God bless his soul. He did things with a Tomcat nobody else would ever do. You scare the crap out of me when I watched him fly. But you don't routinely over G the airplane. You just don't do that because most importantly, you're causing the maintenance team to do some more work. and you're damaging the airplane. Because an over-G, what that really means is you are creating plastic deformation in the structure of the airplane, and they have to go inspect it. And if you over-G it enough, you'll actually strike the airplane. It won't be able to fly anymore. Hey, Timmy, you're really looking forward to this Q&A. Okay, David Smith. I know Snort liked his tricks, but how often did you use tricks like differential thrust, manual wing geometry, and dropping the flaps? Could they get you in trouble with a jet and or maintenance? That's an awesome question. First of all, differential thrust in the Tomcat will put you in a flat spin. Never, ever, ever, ever. So that little trick at the end of Tom Cruise, when he takes one to idle and puts you on an afterburner, no, nope, never, fake. Don't ever do that. And neither did Snort. Nobody messed with the engines. In the F-14A, they were Pratt & Whitney TF-30s, and you could stall them. In fact, in my book, there's a story about an ejection where both engines stalled, and I was out of control already, so I ended up jumping out. Manual wing geometry, every once in a while, you could kind of trick. If you were coming into a fight and the wings were, if you swept them all the way back, using the thumb switch on the throttle to 68 degrees, you could fake people out to think you're going really, really fast. And they can look at you and you can look at that airplane's going slow or it's only 300 knots, but they look at you real quick and they think you're going really fast, and you could fake them out at the merge, and then you click the wings up into auto, and now you can turn into them. Snort used to do that, actually. And people that didn't understand the Tomcat or didn't understand, what was going on, they'll do something wrong, and then you could turn inside of them. I did drop the flaps. That's a prohibited maneuver in the Tomcat because if you drop the main flap, so there are maneuvering flaps in there that would work on and off automatically based on the air data computer. The main flaps, we call them dropping the big boys, something like that, big boys. Anyway, I'll think about it. But there were these torque tubes. There were these steel or aluminum torque tubes that made all the flaps work in unison. So you had several control surfaces. There were slats on the front, flaps on the back of the wing, and they all worked together, and there were these torque tubes. If you put the flaps down under G, it would break the torque tube, and now you have a flap asymmetry, and that's why it was prohibited. I was taught how to use those flaps as a last-ditch maneuver in Top Gun. And so what I would do is, and I used it a couple of times, one time gunned an A4 where the Marine Top Gun instructor, he basically said, "How did you do that?" He couldn't see that the wing got fatter. He just saw that all of a sudden I went from lagging him with him pulling on me to pulling inside of him and gunning him for a pretty long time with the flaps down. I only got to do that one. It only happened one time. It was in the course. And so you unload the airplane, let go of the G, and you drop the flap handle, and it would take all the flaps all the way down, and then you could put the G back on up to 2.5 Gs with the flaps down. You couldn't do any more anyway, even full afterburner with the flaps. So I did use the flaps. Intercry, thanks for being here. Hang on a second. Freckle Puny, hi everybody. Joe, I'm concerned with the current capabilities of Navy aircraft. The current inventory has minimal range and low speed, especially loaded. China's missiles are in range to strike us and we can't. So, Joe, you brought up a great point. The actual problem with our current air wing off the ship is the reduced range. So when I grew up, we had Tomcats A6s that could go a couple thousand miles. A6s go a long way carrying a lot of bombs. Tomcats could go 1,000-mile radius out carrying a lot of stuff. And since then, our Super Hornets and our F-35s on the Navy carrier deck have gotten shorter range than that. They are very, very, very capable airplanes. When they're loaded up, any airplane can't accelerate very well. And the speed, some with the threat out there, especially some of the China and Russia aircraft, you do have to have slightly higher speed than we do. But our aircraft are really badass. They are really, really good. So it's not just speed and range. What that does is, so when you say China's missiles are in range to strike us and we can't, what that means is coming from the carrier deck, the DF-21 missile and DF-26 missile push the carrier strike groups out farther than the range of the airplanes. You're right. And so what we're doing is we create tactics to be able to get inside on that umbrella. And I will tell you in my experience, when I started flying in the 1980s and went on deployment in 1984, the Russians had missiles that they could shoot at us from a range longer than our airplanes. So we've always dealt with that threat, and the U.S. Navy will go into harm's way and we'll operate our carrier strike groups in there. I absolutely guarantee you. But in our future airplanes, we are looking for more range and more speed. SBQR 77, so Speaker 77. Can you describe the F-35C as a dogfighter within visual range? Some people refer to it as Fat Amy because of lack of its weight and power, or lack of. I've never flown the F-35. So I can't really answer the question there as a dogfighter. I have heard the same rumors that you have, that the airplane is underpowered, especially when heavily loaded. I did watch a demo at an air show, and it was a clean airplane, of course. Thought it was pretty badass. Thought it was pretty cool. I have flown the simulator, and the systems in there are spectacular. So again, many people look at fighters and like, okay, we're 1v1 right here, boom, let's go. And you say, well, we're not any good because like a MiG-29 can outmaneuver an F-18, or a Chinese, advanced airplane outmaneuver our F-35. That's only one way to look at it. But I will tell you, we got our asses kicked in Vietnam with lower performing airplanes flown by Vietnamese pilots until the Phantom and Crusader guys went to Top Gun to learn how to, operate their airplanes. So it depends on the pilots. Let's see. Puke and George, you ever done a splitting the throttles like Maverick? I already answered that question. Nope, never do it. Don't do it. You will spin the Tomcat. And I'm glad there's no Tomcats flying now, because people will try doing that Top Gun thing and they'd go spin the airplane. Hakan Eggman, what's your take on being an airline pilot compared to a naval aviator? Type answer, an airline pilot is a systems operator while a military pilot is actually flying. I would say that modern military airplanes are much like modern airline airplanes. The technology in them is getting to be the point where you're flying a computer. And so a lot of the time now, like in a Tomcat, I would never put the airplane on autopilot while I was, out in a tactical space, even when adminning. So admin flight out there, I was always really flying the airplane because you're doing it with the hydraulics. With the digital airplane, when you're doing stuff inside the cockpit and managing your systems, you just bang, 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 put it on autopilot. Now the thing's flying along. It's great. Same thing with an airliner. What's funny is the debate between an Airbus airplane and a Boeing commercial airplane, where the Airbus airplane is a lot more autonomy in the computers, where a pilot is kind of advising the airplane. And I've never flown either of them. I flew a P-8, which is a Boeing 737, and the Boeing is a lot more pilot. And so that discussion about, are you actually flying it, or are you doing things like automatic, autopilot, things like that? Most times, airline pilots, as I've watched and listened to, they will use the automatic modes to operate the airplane. So as soon as they take off, the takeoff might be automatic, but generally hand-flown takeoff, and then they will put the autopilot in to go up to, they'll set the throttles, and then they'll put the altitude that the autopilot needs to level the airplane out at, and the airplane will level out by itself. And then on the landing, you can't automatically land all the way 0-0 weather, all the way to the runway, and all the pilot has to do is engage the auto throttles and engage the autopilot and land. In fact, the currency for landings from the FAA and other international regulatory agencies are like the airline pilot has to have at least 3 landings in 90 days. So if they have that kind of limit, you can imagine the number of computer landings that are happening, and the pilots have to keep their hand in it. I always joke, and I know you guys too. So you're an airliner somewhere, and the thing plants, lands hard on the runway. You go, Navy pilot, and then it flares real nice. You can barely hear the squeak of the tires hitting. You barely even know you landed already, and you go, Air Force guys, used to flaring. So that's kind of the way I look at it. Hey, Danny D, thanks for watching the video with Mooch. Will you do more of those? Yep, absolutely. We have a good time. I think that I won't spoil Mooch's thunder, but I think we're going to do some carrier work on the next one. The Freckle Puny, what do you think of the Iranian efforts to keep the F-14 in service as long as they have? I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it. Because when we were actually maintaining our Tomcats, it was really hard. It was at the end of the Tomcat life, it was 70 maintenance man hours per flight hour. 70 maintenance man hours on the ground for 1 flight hour in the air. And that's a lot. I would tell you, I don't have any access to classified material anymore, but I'll bet you they're not even flying. So you'd have to prove to me that those F-14s are actually flying. If they are keeping them in service, it's because the parts are being gotten on the black market. And I can tell you that American, like the FBI and other agencies like that, they watch for that stuff. Mike L. Many F-14 pilots always mention Snort as being a wizard with the F-14. What set him apart from the rest? Just the way he flew the airplane, Mike. He was a demonstration pilot, F-14 demonstration pilot, and he would manipulate the rudders and stick and throttle such that airplane really danced in the air. And it was stuff that most pilots would go, "Oh, I'm not doing that." Most of the guys that flew with him say, "I'm not doing that either." So I told somebody the other day, being in a fighter ready room is like being in the locker room of a professional sports team. You're competing all the time. Who's the best at their craft? Who can play the sport the best? Flying a fighter is a sport, especially in the daytime around the ship, and then at night you just have to get good at that. But it's really something to be able to do that. And Snort was kind of one of the best at flying the F-14. That's kind of what set him up, set him apart. Oberst Stroopy. Hey, Mike, how did you perform intercepts in real life? Did you really do the math of target aspect, lateral separation, stern conversion by your own, or did you get vectored by ACI, GCI? Both, Oberst, both. So in an F-14A, the pilot gets narrated to by the backseater, and we would work on the target aspect. So target aspect is where his nose is in relation to you. So it's from his cockpit what target aspect is. Then lateral separation, how far apart you are for a turn. And then you determine whether to do a stern conversion behind somebody, which we used to use as like a covert way to join on somebody. You would, at nighttime, you turn out your lights. You might even actually turn off all your emitters in case the airplane you were going against had raw gear, so the reactive gear for that. And then the best intercepts, you're supported by GCI, ground control, or the E2 in the air. And so sometimes what we would do is we get close enough to do our own intercept, and then we'd say Judy. When you say the word Judy over the radio, that means I got this. And so a typical intercept would be actual intercept to join on somebody. It would be like you're going to join on the refueler, like the tanker, the A6 tanker. And he's out in front of you by 50 miles, and now GCI, you need gas, and GCI or the E2 is vectoring you to the tanker, and then they're going to let you go and do something else. So when you got the intercept going, then you go, okay, I got this. You always learned target aspect, lateral separation. You learn to do visual rendezvous using target aspect, lateral separation. You can imagine if you don't have enough lateral separation, you're going to go across him like this, right? And so you got to have enough room to turn so you can join on the guy going like that. So it's a combination of both. Hakan Engman, is there any place for a non-stealth aircraft in today's fight, peer-to-peer? Depends. If you're talking about the high-end air-to-air fight on day one, no place. The technology in our radars and in our weapons is such that you'll get shot in a heartbeat, and it'll be a successful shot. Now, if we're talking about day 20 or 25, and now the mission of the airplane is to go in and either strike ground targets, or all of the high-end aircraft on the threat side have been shot down, yeah, I'll take my Tomcat in there and go fight anybody, right? So now the technology is not the same. But when you're going to go out on day one, you gotta have some survivability characteristics, which, by the way, is what we call that now. So for you guys, you can look on the web about this, but physics, when we talk about stealth, you have to think about what spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum we're talking about. And each of when you look at those, they're all lettered A through, some kind of bands way up on the end. And each one of those spectrum bands is a wavelength and a frequency of a potential sensor. It is very, very difficult to have a stealth airplane to have survivability characteristics against everything in the spectrum, including infrared. And so there's always this discussion about, what kind of survivability characteristics are we talking about? Day one, survivability characteristics, peer-to-peer is huge. Okay. Timmy, thanks. Big boys. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Mike L., what is your opinion? Oh, I did it again. I'm scrolling. Mike L., what is your opinion of the Super Hornet as a tanker? It's a great tanker. Wait a minute. Hold on. Let me get up a little higher. Yeah, so I got to fly the Super Hornet as a captain of Nimitz, 2007 to 2008, and also as a striker commander, the Admiral on the USS Eisenhower in 2012, 2013. Most of my missions, because I stayed close to the ship as the captain and the striker commander, were tankers. And so you load up a 3-wet Super Hornet, two wing tanks and a store in the middle, or a 5-wet, which is 4 wing tanks and a store in the middle. Same store as on the A6, and they do great. Now, if you have 50 Super Hornets on a carrier, and say 4 to 6 of them are, configured as tankers, well, you're taking away from the number of strike fighters you have. So the reason that the Boeing company has been contracted to build a unmanned in-flight refueler, the MQ-25, is because we're trying to get the Super Hornets back to doing Super Hornet stuff. So that's the challenge there. But it's a very effective tanker. Intercry, was it a difficult decision to not go to Top Gun to be an instructor? Well, I can see you read my book. Thank you for that. So when I was getting to the end of my squadron tour in 1987, I was a landing signal officer in the squadron, and I love doing that. I love waving airplanes in the back of the ship. So fly one day, wave the next day. I love that. At the same time as being offered a fleet replacement squadron LSO slot, I was also approached to say I had done well enough in Top Gun as a student to be considered for an instructor job. My skipper, Commander Jim Robb, call sign Rookie, I asked his opinion because I did not know what to do. 2 really great jobs. And he told me that as a commanding officer, he would rather have, as a senior mid-grade officer or a lieutenant commander or a senior lieutenant, he would rather have a guy that taught people how to fly the F-14 and landed on a ship, new people coming into the squadron to do that, than he would a Top Gun instructor who was just teaching advanced tactics to already advanced people. That convinced me, and I never looked back. I've never said I sure wish I was an instructor, because I got actually to do both. I got to teach how to fight the F-14, and I leaned on my Top Gun experience, and I got to do landing signal officer. I love waving. I love waving airplanes, being a paddles, and I absolutely love that. The Freckle Puny, what is your favorite F-14 movie? The Final Countdown, Top Gun, Maverick, Executive Decision, or something else? So just sticking to F-14s. The thing that got me going F-14s out of the Naval Academy and when I graduated in 1981 was Final Countdown, and going that direction. The first Top Gun, I was in Top Gun when they were filming, and so we got to see ourselves kind of doing that. Now they didn't film the class; they filmed everybody else. Anybody in there with aviator glasses on, leaning against the wall, those were all the bubbas that were squadron dudes on the flight line. And then Maverick was just so much fun to me because at the end when they used the Tomcat, I was howling, and so I just thought that was really cool. Joe, thanks, Joe. It seems like we're in need of a fleet defender again with the speed and range limitations of the F-35 and F-18. Diversity aircraft also needed to save the life aircraft being used as tankers. I think I answered that already. You're right. The question before about speed and range limitations. Yep, I think that's right. And then the in-flight refueling, taking that mission away from fighters that are also being used as tankers, I think is the way to go as well. I think what we did in the U.S. Navy was we really tried to reduce the number of type model series. And so for those of you who don't know what a type model series is, TMS is the type of airplane, the model of it, and then the series. And so F-18E, F-18F are two examples of a type model series airplane. So I think we tried to reduce, maybe we over-reduced the type of airplanes we had. So we do need to have, some more abilities there. SPQR 77, maybe I'm just going to say speaker. What's your opinion of modern day Chinese and Russian 5th gen aircraft, overrated or mediocre? Depends. I do not have a high opinion of the Chinese airplanes. Now I'm wary because you never want to underestimate your threat, but I think they copy too much and they don't have enough of their own technology, but they're getting better. So, they've stolen all our technology in the United States and all of our allies. They stole that technology and they're applying. That's why their airplanes look a lot like American airplanes. So I'm not sure on the Chinese side, but I tend to have a lower view. Russian 5th gen aircraft, I think from a survivability standpoint, maybe their survivability characteristics, reference the Spectrum thing we talked about, they might not be as good as we are, but I think they're also doing pretty well. What the Russians can do is they're freaking fast, and those airplanes can maneuver. I mean, big engines, very fast, very powerful, very maneuverable. If you ever seen an SU or an MK, so an SU-30 or a MiG-29 do an air show, oh my God. Okay, can't do that. F-22s can do that, but we can't do that. So in my opinion, pretty close. Let's see. 999 Razor. Nahel and Nasty, love your book. Read half of it. In on the take. Great stuff. Love your view on leadership. A real read for any potential leader. Well, thank you, sir. So that's a better advertisement than me. El Knock. Is it true the Super Hornet cannot do supersonic on the deck like the Tomcat? Has to be fully clean. So I could take my Tomcat F-14A with tanks on, definitely an F-14D with tanks on. There on my website, there's a couple of pictures of me going supersonic in there's one, my change of command flight in 1998 is the one with the colored airplane and the flares coming out of it. That's 1.3 going by the deck of Abraham Lincoln, and you can see how the airplane's loaded. The other one in a tactical paint scheme is about 1.2 with full tanks, and that's working real well as well. So that go pretty fast. Super Hornet's got to be fully clean. Let's see. Timberwolf. Hey, Mike, I think you missed a bunch of questions. I'll go back up there in a second. I got to scroll down. Joe, thanks. Mike L. just here to shout out the Prowler and Growler boys and girls. Don't get enough of a shout out. Yeah, you're right. Growlers. Yep. Hi, Nasty from Muaz Osman. Hey, Nasty, did you ever do any DACT with Malaysian MiG-29? No, I've never done DACT with a MiG-29. Clay Gross, fascinating. Thanks for sharing. Gray Wolf, he skips some. Okay, I'm doing as best I can. I'll get back to him. David Smith, landing on a carrier at night is always described as being tough. With the F-18 handling so much better around the boat, was a good, still tough landing a Hornet at night in good weather. Landing an aircraft on the carrier at night is never easy, ever, no matter the technology. When I was a commanding officer in F-14D with a HUD, I was barely comfortable landing at night, even with good night weather. So it's always really hard. The technology now, though, in the Super Hornet and the F-35, there's a thing in there called pilot landing mode, PLM. I'm sorry, precision landing mode, PLM. And that you can use symbology to put the airplane where you need to, and it's made it a lot easier. Bugan George, what's your favorite book on the Tomcat? I have several picture books. That's the one that I like those pictures of Miramar back in the day called Fighter Town. Some of the descriptive books. Hakan Eggman, is the F-35B an aircraft actually can be used with success in a peer-to-peer fight, considering the range in particular? I think we talked about that. Pretty maneuverable airplane, but fairly short range. And F-35B is this jump jet one. And the problem is they can't carry as much load if they're either short takeoff or going vertical. Josh Bayless, thanks. Hi, Nasty. With junior pilots getting sent Super Hornets, what you said debates them going E model or F model? It's just basically where they get assigned. I was qualified in the E and the F. So a lot of guys like to be single seat guys, but I found it was always really fun, either flying by myself or flying with somebody else. And so it was either one, but you're qualified in both. It's just the needs of the Navy as to which squadron you'll go to. D1CE, which is probably DICE. Hello, Nasty. Is it true that the axes of the Hornet stick are slightly tilted? Is it for compensating pilots' instincts or on overcorrections? If you're talking about the stick geometry itself, generally what they do, the way they design those, is they'll get engineers in there and pilots and aircrew, and they'll just get a feel for, on all the buttons and stuff, they call it haptic, what the haptics are in the cockpit. So whatever the stick is and how it's set up, it will be depending on that. You definitely can see a difference if you look at the pictures of the really old sticks and then going forward to the hands, the HOTAS, hands-off controls, HOTAS. You can see that some of the geometry there is so you can do all that while still manipulating. So I think that's what it did. Timmy, TID ground stab versus aircraft stab. When do you change? As a pilot, I want it in ground stab until the engagement. I think that's right. Remember, the TID operated by a guy in the back seat, the Rio. I don't have a lot of time doing that. And so I think I got confused sometimes, the display on the TID as repeated on my scope, on my HSD. And if the Rio had it in a different one and I wasn't oriented that way, it could cause trouble. Rich Fashionella, do you think systems like Magic Carpet and other assisted carrier landings are leading degradation of pilot skills on a carrier? No, I don't think they're leading degradation. You have to, Magic Carpet is the slang term or the colloquialism for precision landing mode. You have to learn to fly your airplane onto the carrier. And for those guys who say, well, it's not the same as flying a Tomcat aboard and that kind of stuff, I just say you learn how to fly your airplane. E2 guys, Growler guys, Prowler guys, Tomcat guys, A7 guys, you have to know the characteristics. What I will tell you is that Magic Carpet and other PLM modes make landing safer and make the chance of mishap less. We did have an F-35 mishap. That airplane has PLM, like Magic Carpet. And so you can see that the human can still mess it up. Inner Cry, what did it feel like to take command of the Nimitz? Epic. Best job in the galaxy, being the CO of an aircraft carrier, bar none. You could leave me there till I died. I could do that forever. Absolutely unbelievable. Pukin George, did some DCS with Mooch. Do you play a lot? Always the F-14 or other types? It's always F-14 with me, and it's always what Mooch wants me to do. Muaz Asman, will BFM training ever go away now that modern missiles are more reliable than they were in Vietnam? Muaz, I would tell you that basic fighter maneuvering, BFM, will never go away. We made a mistake in Vietnam by not putting a gun in the Phantom because we thought that the Sparrow missile was going to take away, visual maneuvering. That didn't take the place. So we still train American Air Forces, Navy and Air Force, and Army and the helicopters and stuff. We still train basic fighter maneuvering. Let's see. And Mike, I want to make sure I'm still doing the right thing with the questions here, because of the pokes on. I missed some questions. Am I doing okay? Okay. Okay, good. Thanks, you guys, and I hope I'm getting to what you wanted here. And I'm sensitive to, hey, you missed something. 2 ZZGE 100. In DCS, the F-18 seems to be better one in slow speed maneuvering and BFM, while the F-14 seems to excel in the two-circle flow and vertical scissors from an energy management perspective. Is that how it was in real life? Yes, exactly. And great questions. And maybe you saw my ACM primer that I did with Mooch on the last one, where we had a whiteboard, talked about energy management. The F-18, because of the computers, because of the way it's wing loaded, because of its enhanced thrust over the Tomcat, is a better maneuvering aircraft. Now, if I'm going to go fight an F-18 where I'm in F-14A with the lower propulsion engines, or especially the F-14D, I'm going to beat that F-18, especially in the D. I'm going to want to do a two-circle flow, so I'm turning towards his tail, away from each other, so describing it like a figure eight, and rate the airplane around a corner. If you look at the energy curves of the F-18 against the F-14, he has a better energy spectrum than the F-14 does. based on the wings, the way the flaps work, the computers getting everything out of the airplane, and then also the propulsion. But an F-14D with 110s, I can kick an F-18 ass any day in that airplane. The ability to go vertical very slow outperforms the F-18. And so if that F-18 was well flown, you're getting a flat scissors. So we're doing that pretty hard. So, but yes, the thing that the DCS kills me on is the wing rock thing. So it's easy for me in the F-14, so I give it a little bit of stick, and all of a sudden I realize I'm in this wing rock because I've over-G'd the airplane, so I can't sense that. That's the difference between flying a real airplane and the DCS. Cyberpunk, thanks. Su-35 outperforming F-16 and F-15 in Syria. Iranian getting Su-35. How do you see Iranian Su-35 against F-18 Super Hornet? It ain't just the airplane. Our pilots and air crews are trained so much better than the Iranians. The number of hours in the airplane annually that we are going to be able, even if we had an underperforming airplane and they have an overperforming airplane, the kill ratio is going to be, they're not going to fly beyond like the second day. I guarantee that. Clement's Family Adventures. The F-35 would do great against peer-to-peer. Situational awareness is amazing. Yep, you got it right. Lee Shelton, did the Rio get pilot training? Thanks for that. Only in the training command. They would fly in the front seat of T-34s, and they would fly in the front seat of, I think now they fly in the front seat of a T-45 to get a sense of what the pilot's doing up there. But in Tomcats, the Rio was not qualified to fly in the front, and most of you know there were no controls in the back. Hey, Felix rules, Max 86 ZNT. Max, look at Felix. That's awesome. Hi, Mike. Were there any quality differences among Tomcat squadrons? Were there a more prestigious squadron than others? No need to name. I think that's name them, of course. I'll tell you what. There were squadrons with better reputations, Max, kind of like Felix. And it depended on the leadership at the time and the reputation of the people in the squadron and kind of how they handled themselves around the flight line and the boat. And probably also things like, mishaps or, doing something dumb or something like that. So, yeah, and it would vary, right? Now, what I will tell you is that I went to VF1 Wolfpack for my department head tour in the early 90s. I went there and I was the safety officer, the ops officer, and the maintenance officer. And what was amazing to me is VF1 or 2, those two squadrons, VF1 or VF2, won the prestigious Battle E every single year without fail. VF1 or VF2. So I went there and I went, why is that the case? And I just kind of found out the way they did things and the way they kind of, flew in accordance with processes and procedures and actually the Battle E instruction. And they went out and did all the things required to win the Battle E. But the reputation they had was gigantic. So, yeah, there were more prestigious squadrons and it mostly depended on who was there, primarily the head shed, the CO and XO, and then how kind of the reputation flew. And, when you operate around the boat or around the airfield, that stuff is really all about, the professionalism of the squadron. And so that changed a lot. Joe, do you think the Navy needs more diversity, aircraft, more specialized roles? I feel like this would solve the lifespan issues using fighters as tankers. Yeah, we talked about that already. Thanks, Joe. Oh, it did it again. It clicked. Hang on. Going back up. Let's see. Yeah, sorry, I got the, okay. Clements, thanks for the explanation. Joe, you have used the term patch wearer in the past. Patch wearer means a Top Gun patch or an Air Force Fighter Weapons School patch. A patch wearer is somebody who's been to the school and they're wearing a patch. So literally we call them patch wearers. Danny D, most wanted plane in DCS is the Tomcat D. I can see. I don't have any influence. Oberst, thank you. Cal Niegbauer, what's your opinion of Ukraine and wanting F-16s be a better platform in your opinion the F-16, such as the F-18, the Gripen, or even staying with Soviet jets? I don't have an opinion on that. There's, I would want a high-end Air Force if I was them to be able to operate there. The F-16 is a badass jet, and for ground attack and for fighting and being small and able to get away, F-16's, I think, a pretty nice choice. YouTuber, thanks. What's your opinion on a Block 3 Super Hornet and its capabilities? Awesome. Awesome. Best Super Hornet ever. Clements, thanks for Rio's. You're right, initial pipeline. Hakan Eggman, do you believe that we will have some two-seat fighter aircraft in the future as well, as long as we have manned aircraft? Yeah, I think so. I think the seats are going to be dependent on the mission. I will tell you, in a very, very high-end threat environment, 2 people in the airplane is more than 1 + 1. And so you really can do some good work. TC Productions. Hi, Nasty. I've heard pilots talk that Tomcat was not hard to fly, but hard to fly well. So guys like Snort, Slammer, yourself are known to be great Tomcat pilots. What did you guys do differently? Well, first of all, thanks for putting me in with Snort and Slammer. The Tomcat was hard to fly. You had to really watch out for the aerodynamic, nature of it. The engines would stall at about any time in the Tomcat A. Bringing it aboard the ship was really hard, and hard to get well, because they called it a turkey, because the thing would wallow and kind of flap, and coming aboard it would look kind of ugly until you figured out what to do. And really what it is having the hands to figure out just exactly the right control move. You see me move my throttle hand over here and my stick hand here. You were always correcting, recorrecting, and you had a sense for how much stick and how much throttle made the airplane do what you wanted it to do. Snort kind of in a class by himself with what he did with the airplane, but it's basically a combination of stick, rudder, and throttle, and of course G. But the way that you did that, and you made the airplane look like that. The D, with the new engines, the HUD, the digital spoilers, digital flight controls, all made it a lot easier, where the pilot inputs were kind of damped out. So, any pilot, anybody who really, can drive a car or really is smooth at flying the pilots, the aerobatic pilots, how do they do that? It's a skill set, right? So you work on that skill set. Joe, what do you think about impending problem Navy decommissioning more ships than it builds? I'm not a ship person, but I agree that we probably should be building more than we decommission. And of course, with a #1 threat, there's a saying out there that capacity has a capability all its own. So having more ships is better. Freckle Puny, which Soviet, Russian, or Chinese type you give most respect to? The high-end ones across the board, and then the Russian ones I'm more familiar with, because they were kind of coming about when I was still flying. So MiG-29, Su-30, MKKs, those Russian airplanes are pretty capable. And so yeah, that's what I would say. Timmy, good technical question. RTP to the boat, Marshall stack. How many aircraft per altitude? Up to 4 divisions, ? What speed in the holding pattern? Okay, so daytime Marshall stack, daytime overhead, you'll have squadron altitudes or fighter altitudes. So low holding at 2,000 feet, the fighters are up there, and you just put them all up there. And you can't exceed the number there. There could be 4 divisions of fighters all trying to get down. The number of airplanes in the event is not going to exceed the number of airplanes in the holding pattern. High holding was per squadron. Nighttime RTB to the boat, Marshall stack, it's 1 airplane every 1,000 feet, because you only push 1 at a time, 1 minute apart. So they're different. Okay, so daytime, everybody's stacked up 1,000 feet apart. Many airplanes are supposed to be there. Nighttime, 1 airplane per 1,000 feet, 20 miles out. Intercry, what leadership lessons from the Navy do you bring to your role at Boeing? Easy. Leading people's the same. People would say in the Navy, well, I can just order them what to do. You could, but the morale would not be high. People would not try their best with me, and they wouldn't fail. It's the same thing in the civilian world. Leading people is the same way. You lead with authenticity, humility. My book talks about that a lot. Vulnerability, and you learn to lead such that you're not disappointing them, they're not disappointing you. L knock knock, with hypersonic technology becoming more prevalent, I would say for weapons, is the carrier fleet concept becoming obsolete? Absolutely not. You still have to target that carrier that's moving. Okay, so the more important question is, with hypersonic technology or even cruise missile technology or ballistic missile technology, are airfields becoming obsolete because they don't move? Okay, so you have to have a mobile fleet to be able to do that. And we're going to continue to do things underneath and around those envelopes to be able to be effective. Hakan Engman question, do you believe that the USN and the Navy and the Marines lack a really, how to say, a really good ground attack aircraft on day 20 in a future conflict, like the A-10? Yeah, absolutely. Or lack one. No, I don't think so. I think you can configure the airplanes that we have, to go F-18s, F-35s can go, they go to ground attack mode really, really well, especially with precision weapons. So the point is about getting in close to doing that. Most of our aircraft now are high end. Aeroflip 97, what was the G limitation of the tanks on the Tomcat? The G limitations are the same as the airplane. These are called LBA, limited by airframe. The G of the tanks. Speed limitation, you weren't supposed to go supersonic. Sorry. Oberst in DCS, the F-14 only shows a maximum of 8 data link contacts. Sometimes it happens, you end up not seeing hostile contacts. Is that limitation a DCS thing, or did you really have that issue? It's a DCS thing. India John. Hey, Nasty, how was the Tomcat and Hornet like to do aerial refueling, and which were the best and worst aircraft to refuel from? Yeah, great question. So in the Tomcat, the refueling probe was back behind your head. So you had to look at it to see, how you were getting it into, you kind of had to look over at the probe. It was kind of over here. It wasn't behind your head, but it was over here a ways. So you had to shift your scan from the basket to the, over to the probe, which made it a little difficult on your scan. The Super Hornet, it's out front a little bit, and it's kind of closer, so you can keep the whole thing in your scan as you're approaching the basket. The airplanes, so I tanked off an A3 when I first qualified, the A7 with a tank on one of its wing stations, KC-135, a KC-10, and those. The Navy refuelers, they were kind of all the same. The one that's most terrifying to most of us is the KC-135. It has a long boom. There's a 9-foot hose about that big around and a steel basket. It's relatively easy because that steel basket doesn't move to put the probe into the basket. But once you get the probe in the basket, you have to push the basket forward at the end of this long boom. It puts the hose in a C kink, and that kink in the hose is what gets fuel moving. But then that hose lays on your nose. And a 9-foot hose, you can't move very much before you disconnect. And if you disconnect relatively violently, that steel basket will break your carrier or break your canopy, or it will take the tip off of the probe. So those are always really hard, especially at night. Dark night, stormy weather, your whole life is that knuckle, and it sucked. I squeezed the black juice out of the stick many times in southern Iraq on a KC-135. So that's just hard. What do you think of the Rafale as a carrier fighter compared to Super Hornets? I actually I was Striker Commander, and our Super Hornets on Ike fought the Rafales and beat them every time. Petra Irene, that's your question. So the Super Hornet is a better fighter than a Rafale, as flown by the pilots that were flying them. 2ZZG100, you mentioned you would never want to lose in a D against an A. Your student, Slammer Richardson, said he used to beat students' D babies in an F-14D with an A in BFM. What are your thoughts? Better pilot. So I would agree with that, and I will again tell you that it just depends on the pilot and the airplane, and not just the airplane. Let's see. Moaz Osman, as a former CSG commander, what do you think a modern carrier versus carrier fight would look like if Gerald Ford CSG faced off against the Chinese Fujian CSG? Gerald Ford would win hands down. We've got 100+ years of carrier operations and maneuvering, and we understand what it takes to fight the carriers. Chinese don't. They are just starting. They have no idea how to fight that carrier. They don't know how to do MCON operations. They don't know how to cyclic ops their airplanes. And if you look at that carrier deck and what they've got on the carrier deck and what Gerald R. Ford has capability-wise, we'd win that fight in a heartbeat. Benjamin Perez, as someone who was there, how did things change in naval aviation pre and post Top Gun, i.e. the vibe of the community, the O Club, etc. Thanks again, Nasty. So the latest Top Gun Maverick, we've actually assessed there wasn't really a blip in the recruiting. First Top Gun movie, huge. Everybody had a flat top coming in. Everybody wanted to go fly fighters. It was the greatest recruiting movie for naval aviation in absolute history. So I got to Miramar in 1981. I went to flight school, went back there in middle of 83 and flew Tomcats all the way through the 80s. And so Miramar was epic. It was fun. It was fighter town. You know, Top Gun was there. The O Club was spectacular. And in 1986, the movie came out, and that exploded, even greater than that. There used to be lines out the gate of women trying to go to the officers club and men trying to go to the officers club in a flight suit they picked up from the thrift shop, because the vibe there was humming. And they would hand out hostess passes to people that were going to the O Club. Yeah, I see we're getting there. Let me look for a good question here, Mike. Yeah, so first of all, that guy from Zeta Alpha V, Tom Cruise climbs back in F-14. Dude, I cheered in the theater. I just jumping up and down. I said, that's great. But I want to answer Puke and George. Did you see the new emails in action on the new Ford class carrier? Still looks exciting as steam with a question mark. Yeah, I did see it, Puke and George. What was amazing to me is the airplane goes off and there's like no sound. It just goes, and all you hear is the jet noise from the military power as he takes off. And gone was the steam coming out of the cat and the slamming of the shuttle into the water break. So you always had this bang whenever the cat went off. When the emails goes off, there's no sound, which is just strange to me because I have, you know, 3 decades of being on carriers, and I was used to the cat shot with steam and the bang going on there. Hey, this has been awesome, you guys. The questions are great. Thanks for being interested, and Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nasty. I mean, what a great Q&A this was. And yeah, I want to thank everyone who came in and put the questions in to Nasty tonight. But Nasty, thank you very much. And just if you can remind our viewers where we can find you online, just so we can pick up the book and stuff like that.
Oh, hey, thanks for that. So www.mikemanazir.com is the website with all the leadership stuff on it. And then my book is in the top right corner there. And you can get that book on Amazon and most places in any format, including my audio book, which I actually tell you those stories. So you listen to this voice telling you those stories. So thanks, everybody. And I appreciate that, Mike.
Awesome stuff. And maybe I can twist you arm to come on a show, you know, in the future for another Q&A, because we had so many questions coming out and great questions as well. So hopefully we can get you back on the show, Mike. And yeah, thank you very much for coming on. And yeah, guys, thank you in the comments. So cheers and have a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are.